Actresses Jenny Slate and Kristen Bell have quit their voice role jobs as Black characters on two popular animated television shows, Big Mouth and Central Park. This week, they announced that they would step down in response to the systemic racism that has touched multiple industries. In a pair of statements shared on social media, they said their casting had contributed to the erasure of their Black colleagues. Was this the right move? Will other Hollywood actors step down from their jobs? Should they? We're going to start there for our Week in Review. Joining me now are Neil Headley from AM 740 and the Snooze Button podcast, along with Lucas Meyer from CFRB 1010. Thanks for joining me this morning, gentlemen.
Morning, guys.
Morning.
All right, so Neil, I'm going to start with you. This was an interesting move. I want to get your reaction to both of these women stepping down from their jobs.
Well, it's interesting. Look, both characters are mixed race children. One parent is Black, one parent is white in the cases of both of the characters in these animated features. So interesting choice. The more interesting one to me is the character of Cleveland on Family Guy, who has been voiced forever by a white actor, who has also announced that he's done with that one. The Simpsons have made similar cast changes. So I guess with the case of an animated feature, you've got to ask yourself the question, is this a voice or is it a character? If it's a voice, maybe it's a different conversation. If it's a character and you buy into the characters and you believe that the actor playing the character needs to have some sort of connection to that actual character, okay, then we can have a more serious conversation about Kristen Bell. I know that the people I've talked to said, why did these people accept these roles in the first place if they didn't have the same background as the character they were playing, which, never having been an actor outside of high school, I don't know that I'm the one to address questions like that. But
I think the answer to that question is you've got bills to pay.
Well, there is absolutely that. And I mean, Kristen Bell's got enough other things on her hands with The Good Place and everything else that she's been doing and all the Frozen movies and whatnot. But so I don't know that she's hurting for money by having stepped down from this particular gig. But we talked about this last time that, you know, your platform extends however far your platform extends, and you got to do whatever you're capable of doing. Kristen Bell apparently looked at her platform and went, okay, here's something I can do that makes a difference. And the fact that we're even having the conversation, like you said last week when we talked about this, having the conversation is half the battle.
Absolutely. And Lucas, what was your initial reaction when you heard this news?
I didn't even know, I got to be honest, I didn't know that these shows existed because I don't watch too much television. And then when I actually, but more importantly, Andrea, to your question, I think the thing that really hit me was, that speaks to this larger conversation, is you couldn't find perfectly suitable and talented people of color to voice biracial characters. I think that's what hit me. But then perhaps, Andrea, that's the bigger issue, is that there seems to be this kind of blinder situation where you are in an environment where that just seems to be the norm and that seems to be acceptable. And now in this age that we're in terms of not just major social unrest around police reform, et cetera, but it's these minor, these kind of smaller, isolated situations in no matter what sector, in this particular one, Hollywood, where you can see what seems to be a very obvious, easy change. If you have characters, even if they're animated, where they are characters of people of color, biracial, et cetera, just why in the world did this even happen in the first place? But I suppose that is a situation that a lot of people are talking about initially anyway.
Yeah, and these two women were playing characters that are shows that are like on season 1 and season 2. These are brand new shows.
Right.
The other characters, like the Apu character on The Simpsons, that Hank Azaria said he will not voice it anymore. Those shows have been on for decades. So it's interesting that now we're starting to see that change. But do you think this is going to force Hollywood to rethink the way they cast all shows, not just the animated shows? Neil, I'm going to send that one to you.
I think it's going to give opportunities. I think it's going to provide maybe opportunities for people who might ordinarily have been passed over. Look, if you're the casting director for one of these shows, let's not kid ourselves. If you find out that you can get Kristen Bell to play one of the parts on your show, you're like, okay, what role can we give her? Let's find something for her to do. She's Kristen Bell, for crying out loud. I mean, you know, courtesy of all the work she's been doing lately, she's a big deal. And so if you can get her in your cast, good for you. and you're going to find a place to put her. However, as Lucas was saying, I'm sure there are all kinds of people out there that are incredibly talented who could look. Lucas does, as I'm told, a terrific impression of the prime minister of the country, which is fine because they're both white guys. The fact that I do a terrific impression of Red Fox is probably not going to come in all that handy and useful.
Yeah, I would suggest that you don't do Red Fox here on television.
Exactly.
Just so you can keep your day job, your 9 to 5. All right, so Lucas, there are some people who feel, although the gesture is kind by these two women stepping down, that the justice that people have been protesting for weeks in the street, this is not it. This is not what they're looking for. They're looking for reform within the judicial system. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the path to progress can include both baby steps as well as major long strides. And, you know, in following this conversation, not just the last couple of years, but I think this is something that I've been really kind of looking into really since Ferguson, is that there are so many different environments and areas that are under focus. And so certainly you can have, you know, as someone who is, you know, who is following the Devontae Miller development yesterday, we have the ability to both look in areas of that we were kind of talking about before, Andrew, where there are major discussions to be had around the Black community. And so police reform is one of those things. But what I've been hearing a lot is that it's also the more in the non-overt situations, the more day-to-day interactions that can also be addressed. So for me to relate, and I'll relate in this way, I mean, I'm Jewish. And so I can tell you that I can probably do without some of the what seems to be kind of normalized and everyday anti-Semitic tropes around Jews and money, for example. I would be okay doing away with that. But some people may not understand, you know, kind of the deep-rooted issues that, you know, maybe a careless joke about money, you know, how that can affect someone. So those are the types of things that we can do, both, I think, on a grander, bigger scale around how communities and different demographics speak to each other, both large scale and smaller scale.
Yeah, and we're out of time. I wish we could continue with this conversation. Thanks again to my panel, Neil Headley from AM 740 and Lucas Meyer from CFRB 1010. Lucas, we will be looking for that impression of the Prime Minister at another time. Thanks again.
Of course.
Thanks both.